Working here. So, I have, 10 o'clock, right on the button. Starting this meeting at 10 o'clock, and I would like to welcome Peter Basari, our new member. So welcome. And in addition, in attendance, we have Jean Lawson, Sturgis Dodge, Susan Wood, and your musical host, Don Ho, otherwise known as Hoyte Decker. And we don't have any minutes to approve today, so we're going to move right along. No correspondence. I have nothing for organization. We don't have any citizens here, so we're just rocking and rolling. A lot of time here.
Okay.
So I'm going to take the next item out of order. The zoning code matter that we've been addressing sporadically, 270.83 violations and penalties. I just want to note that I had contacted the mayor, the city manager, and the city attorney some while back, and they got back to me in the last week or so. And it's worth noting that they're all pretty much in agreement to move this provision forward. The city attorney, Glenn Mandalis, indicated that he's probably got some significant comments that he's going to make on some of the proposed language. For example, he's seeing some inconsistencies, he says, with Chapter 126, which he indicates, at least in his opinion, covers civil offenses and specifically provides that no violations that are declared a civil offense may be prosecuted as a criminal matter. So, any comments, Gene, or anybody else on where we are on that?
No, if he doesn't like it, he'll give us something in writing.
Okay.
Because if we don't get something in writing from him,
Yeah, we'll get it. He'll have something for us. And indeed, a point of information, it's likely to come up at a workshop meeting, and I think I've already told you, but just for everybody's information, I work on Monday morning, so I'm not available to attend those things. So I might submit something in writing, but you know, if you could be there, that would certainly be helpful too. So, okay.
Wait, do you have a draft?
Oh, by all means, yeah.
Do you have a draft of the 270.83 that
I
went
don't
to
have
them?
it. I don't have it with me, but I can certainly give you what we've come up with, our most recent.
Do you know what the date is? Wait,
The
I have
date?
the date that the last one was drafted.
I don't know
I don't
that
think
either,
we've seen
but
it, have we?
I'm sorry.
Have we seen?
We've gone all through this. Yeah.
It's the one that, the last one that was in
Yeah,
here?
mhm.
Oh, okay, I thought
Yeah.
it changed.
I'll
Okay.
send.
That's fine. No,
I'll
I
send
have
you both
that.
something.
I don't
In
know
fact,
if
I'll
I
send everybody something.
got it.
I'm clueless.
Huh?
I have no idea what we're talking about. So.
Okay.
It was just, I don't recall whether or not we got a chance to discuss this, but
We have dealt with this off and on
Yeah.
for well over a year.
Yeah, it
And
might have
a
been
lot of it probably took place prior to
me.
your arrival.
Yeah, and I just had a question. If this is the proposed change, my questions were what the rationale was for striking section C and D in totality. I just wasn't sure, because, you know, my thought was that the main thrust of this was to change criminal penalties to civil.
It is.
But then C and D don't seem to really.
What is that you're looking at?
Well, this is dated.
Is that a document that the committee had?
This is yours, I believe,
okay.
because that's how you
Okay.
date them.
Okay.
This looks like August 23rd of 2019.
That's probably the most recent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here at the bottom are struck C and D, and the C and D is about what the city can do or shall do if somebody builds something in violation, not in terms of criminal or civil, but that they, I don't know, what does it say? It says that they can take action to correct, you know, that something's a nuisance, they can take action to sort of undo something that's been built, you know, illegally. So it's more about the structure rather than the person. And I just kind of wondered, that didn't seem to be related to
So
the
candidly, I
penalty.
don't have any
I think it's
recollection.
because it's dealt with in the, I think it's chapter 123 or 126, the civil penalties.
So this is a repeat, is that why?
It was twice, it's in there twice.
It's in there twice, so this is
Just got rid of it
redundant.
in.
Thank you, that sounds familiar.
Okay.
I didn't make a good note for
Does
myself.
that satisfy you then?
Thank you, thank you.
Sure.
I think the only thing I wanted to add was that in the draft that we had worked on, we had actually referenced a specific chapter of the code that would be enforcement violations and penalties. That was specific, and it would be something that was consistent throughout the entire code. So instead of each section having a penalties code, there was a code chapter that was written called enforcement penalties and violations, and each code, instead of having paragraphs of description of what happens, would just reference as per, you know, this violation will constitute, you know, charges as per section 1 of chapter whatever, violation codes and penalties. So you don't have to list in every single chapter of the code what happens if you're in violation. You just simply go as per section blank, and some could be written more stringent. So in this particular case, we were leaning more towards the building and zoning codes for how they enforce violations for the tree ordinance revisions that we did. So I would just like to say that I still think it should be a separate chapter.
So, and you've made that point before?
Yes.
And I recognize that. And frankly, well, first of all, I think the intention of Chapter 126 is to serve that purpose, at least with respect to civil penalty actions, okay?
Chapter 126?
Chapter 126.
Okay, yeah, what we just rewrote is chapter 270.
Right.
So in other words, I would say 270 didn't need to say anything other than reference chapter 126.
I'm gonna take a step back on that because I don't feel qualified to answer that question. But to your concept, and you're making a good point. When I went through my review process of it was not only this, it was also 270, 69 or something of signs that we first started with. And I found there's probably a dozen different provisions throughout our code that address violations and penalties.
Right.
And they're all, well, I mean, some of them are the same. In fact, 6 months ago, the Board of Commissioners passed a change in the code to basically streamline about 6 of these things. It was brought up by the code enforcement officer, and so they actually made changes. But there's still differences.
I'm just saying,
and
if
you
we're
can
heading in
find
that
differences.
direction, it's going to make this
Yeah, and
approval
so,
and
I mean,
discussion
there-
and all that kind of
There's fodder
irrelevant.
for considering that as a possible change that we could study.
Because if not, you're going to be changing 270-83s 10 times in the course of all the code changes that we're going to be doing. So there's going to be one in trees, there's one in signs, there's one in building, there's one in, you know, I'm sure I can't list them all, but,
There's probably a good dozen of them.
right. And then you spend all this time rewording just one in zoning, now you're going to have to go,
Right.
we have one here in trees that has
Yep,
to be addressed,
yep.
so.
There's a reference to the chapter 1, is it 126?
Yes.
There's a reference to that throughout the municipal code, not just the zoning code, not just
True.
270. And everything that has a civil offense is referred to that same chapter. So that's consistent throughout the code.
Yet why do they go back and then restate different penalties and fines? I was just thinking if they're gonna say.
'Cause that was there
it
first.
used to be a $500 fine and now it's 10 years later and it really should be a $1,000 fine. If you only have to change it in one chapter, you
Right.
don't have to rewrite each
The
section.
reason is that all those individual ones were put in before the new chapter for civil penalties was put in.
Okay,
When it was put in, they should have cleaned up the rest of the code, and they
Right.
didn't.
So that's what I'm suggesting, is rather approve 270.83, let's throw something in chapter 126 and reference it that way, just a suggestion.
So,
Not to slow progress, but, I mean, we gotta start
No.
somewhere.
I mean, your point's well taken. In fact, what I'm gonna suggest is that if you would like, you could do a little memo, bring it back to us, making this suggestion, and, you know, you might even have some references to some of the code provisions. I mean, you mentioned a couple already. And we'll pass that along to Glenn Mandelis. I'm happy to do that. Okay. All right, so, any other thoughts on the zoning code issue? Okay, well, if not, I want to make a note of the time, because 10:11 on your recording thing, I've asked Susan and Sturgis to provide me with at least some draft minutes for this particular section. So just so you note, and we'll, 10:11, and then when we get done, because I'm going to do the rest of it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Susan and Sturgis to provide us with their concepts, which they've submitted as a series of documents. And my only introductory comment is you may be significantly setting us back in this process, but that might be a good thing. So have at it, ladies.
Well, I would kind of say, we could be setting you back, or we could be setting us forward.
There you go.
So, it's kind of one or the other. And I guess at the outset, I just want to say that, we entered into this process kind of fully appreciative and cognizant of the incredible amount of work and energy that's been heretofore applied to the code revision, and so we certainly don't want kind of our new concept and effort to, what can I say, to denigrate or diminish, that effort. And we certainly appreciate that. And I would think that kind of the energy and the vision that we brought to this has been inspired by the incredible detail that the current code has been, submitted to, in terms of review. That said, I just kind of wondered, this is quite a departure from kind of how the committee has been working on the tree code up to now. And I think something that Susan and I both were trying to get at is one part of our charge, which is to make the code simpler and easier to understand. And personally, having studied the tree code for probably the past 3 or 4 years, I continue to find the structure of it and the content confounding and often contradictory. And so our approach was really, I think, inspired by trying to distill what is in the current code into the simplest form possible. And Susan and I, as a team, Susan is just amazing. I have to give her credit, because she was able to look at the code and just distill it down into like 1 or 2 sentences for a chapter. And I personally am not saying this is a finished product. I mean, I went back and reviewed even some of the suggestions that I had added as kind of amendments to Susan's and my version, and I realized that I put a phrase into the middle of a sentence that was completely contradictory to what I intended. So this is a work in progress. This is a draft. This is an outline of a concept. So it kind of started, I was wondering, this is quite a lot of material, and I'm wondering if you all have had a chance to look at it, and whether you had a chance to form any kind of thoughts or opinions about it. I don't want us to talk in a vacuum. I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm just sort of wondering if anybody has any thoughts right out of the gate about whether or not this is completely off the mark, whether you think it has some merit, what it might be missing. I mean, I know you haven't had a lot of time to look at this. Jean?
I think the approach is much better than the approach we had before. Okay. For one thing, it seems to me it's an approach that started from zero, as opposed to starting from a piece of crap
Got it.
legislation that we've been screwing around with for the last 10 years. So I think this is a better approach. Getting rid of stuff is good idea. Making it simpler, shorter, more in English instead of whatever language they were using before.
Hearing that from an attorney, that's a great comment. Thank you.
Well, it's good actually to have non-attorneys writing stuff like this.
Yeah. Because, I mean, my feeling is a non-attorney should be able to understand this. And so, I mean, thank you. That was really our thought. How about you?
Well, I read the original code,
Okay.
and then I read your code proposal, and yours is cleaner, it's less cumbersome. As someone who is an attorney, but also is just a citizen, I would much prefer to have to follow your code. I have comments throughout, but I think the direction is, it's just clean. And if you own a business in Rehoboth or you own a residence in Rehoboth, it's so cumbersome trying to even find a way to look for something.
Yeah.
So I think this made it much easier. So I think this is the direction that I would have taken.
Got it. Gotcha.
There you go.
Okay. Well, that's
Well, now
great.
wait a minute,
Yes.
I have to-
I'm sorry.
I have
Go
to be the
ahead.
contrarian here.
Oh, why not? Why not?
And I guess my attitude's gonna be, I'm gonna be open about this. But I have some significant concerns about some of the changes. And what I'm hoping to hear from you is further explanations about, you know, the reasons why you're doing certain things. And then, if I may, I'll, you know, give you my thinking on these things. But just to get it started, I'll identify a couple things. One thing, and I sent you a note about this, and I do want to make a note for the record, that your memo states, these are Law Oversight Committee notes. And-
Well, yeah, I mean,
So I want
that's
to
sort of-
correct that to
it's
say
in
that.
lieu of a title, and it was a good editorial catch,
Yeah,
Jean.
so, I mean, I
boy.
would
Yeah.
ask that we amend that to read that these
Sure.
are Susan Wood and Sturgis Dodge member notes, okay? So
Got
that's
it.
just the first thing. And then I was a little confused about the documents themselves. And trust me, I'm with you on this because I'm such a babe in the woods when it comes to redlining. But your document, the draft 22, October 19, Susan Wood and Sturgis Dodge, does that come before the Chapter 253 Tree and Landscape Code, other documents? Tell me how that.
To give you, I will give you kind of the timeline on that.
Yeah.
Susan and I sat down, and the things that are not redlined are in the draft 22 is.
I call that document number 1. if
Okay,
that's-
document 1, that's good. You
There
got
you
a 1 at the top. So document 1, the non-redlined are things that Susan and I drafted together, okay?
Okay.
The red line are amendments that I made after the fact, because what kind of occurred was, what could have occurred is, and then just to kind of close that loop, this one,
Which I call
two,
document 2.
Document 2, which only has Susan's name on it. This includes changes made by Susan, independent of my changes.
After document 1?
After document
Okay.
1, and independent of my red line.
Sure.
So
Okay.
just to let you know our process.
Okay.
We met together, we kind of hashed out kind of the skeleton of this. And then I said to Susan, Susan, because one of our thoughts was that we wouldn't be the final author of this, and that we might need, or the committee might need to have an attorney or a code writer or someone look at it just to make sure that it does what we intended to do. At least that's my primary concern about having a professional look at this.
Okay.
So then as we started to kind of look at several sections, I kind of said to Susan, Susan, I really feel that there are some specifics about things that I think are necessary to preserve trees or certain trees that I'm not sure a code writer would know. And, you know, that they kind of go beyond the skeleton. And I said, I would like to have those in there. Susan did not agree with me sometimes in concept or in some specific points. She did agree on some, I can see from her attempt, her document 2. I said, so rather than us trying to come to a consensus on this, because, you know, we may not be able to come to one, and that may
Right.
not be valuable.
Okay.
Let's just each have our own
Okay.
version,
So
which
that,
states our opinion. So that's, I mean, I went through and I kind of highlighted in Susan's the things that, there's some she appropriated that were my suggestions. There's some changes she made that were
Okay.
just hers. And we also
so
kind
I'm
of,
getting the idea now, so that's good.
we also thought that given the brevity of both of these documents, that we didn't think it would be onerous on you guys to be able
Okay.
to kind of
Okay.
figure that piece out.
Okay.
Because they're pretty obvious.
So that leads me into your comment about the code writer, which you mentioned at the outset of your memo.
Right.
And so, I guess just to clarify for my interest, were you thinking we need to bring in a professional contract to have a professional code writer come in?
I mean, I think Susan, I don't know, Susan kind of stated that when she looked at this. You guys know from me kind of showing up here as first a civilian and then a member of the committee, that I personally feel the city needs a professional code writer to review the whole code of the city.
Yeah.
So,
But Susan, were you
What do you?
thinking specifically about what's your,
Okay. Couple things. I'm trying to be very good at being quiet. So good, aren't I? Okay. All right. So I just have a couple things to say about everything. Thank you for your comments, by the way. So I think basically what Sturgis said in a nutshell is we sat down, we came up with everything that we agreed on, okay? And we put it into writing. Sturgis added a few more things. I thought maybe too many words, okay? But her thought behind it all, correct me if I'm wrong, is this is going to go to somebody else, and she really wanted to beat in the fact that we're trying to save trees here. So I tried to do that in less words, but the thought is the same. We are trying to save the trees, but I think Sturgis was very concerned if it goes to somebody else and they don't know everything we talked about and how she felt, they weren't going to get it.
Right.
I was inclined to assume that they would get that from what we had written, what I had already written, what we had written together. So that's the difference between the two drafts. To answer your question, I am not an attorney. Sturgis is not an attorney, okay? I don't know if the original intent of this board was for us to be code writers. I don't think that has ever been officially determined. I'm assuming there are attorneys on the board because we were supposed to get really close, but I am definitely not a code writer, nor is Sturgis. So what we gave you is a draft with what we want someone to make the code. We were not necessarily trying to write the code. I know, obviously, there's a lot of things in there that attorneys are going to have to put in there to make sure the city's covered. Hopefully, it won't be extensive and crazy. We did have Sandy's input from maybe sending things up to the law students for review. I don't know if that can come into play. But the lady that just walked in the room, I don't even know if she's read this. I have no idea where it went after we gave it to you, Hoyt. So certainly.
I CC'd Liz
Yeah.
when I
Okay.
sent it.
I mean,
And I've communicated.
certainly, it's very easy for us to sit up here and say this is gonna work, but that's the person, and the building official, the person that should sit down next, I would think, with a code writer and say, okay, this is the way we're going, this is some things that you may have to add in, and we realize it's gonna get longer, okay?
So,
But that is basically, did I kinda sum up what?
did you have anything else that you wanted to?
I think, that basically that covers everything,
So-
except that my question was, have any city officials seen it? And yes, it is a draft, and as far as a setback, I mean, it's been 10 years in the making already. I don't think it can set back any further than it already has,
So,
so.
Can I
I'm
make
assuming
one?
that's Liz.
That's Liz Lingo,
Yes.
the city arbor.
yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
That's what I've known.
May I make
Yeah,
just one
Liz,
more?
excuse me.
Yeah,
Excuse me. Liz,
surely.
this is our new committee member. Pete, sorry.
Could I just to kind of explain sort of the packet, I just kind of want to make a comment about this town of Chevy Chase
Yeah,
urban
can-
forest.
May I get to?
Sure,
Yeah,
sure,
let me
sure.
finish my
Okay,
thought about
sure.
the code writer.
Got it, got
And
it.
then
Okay.
actually, that's the
Good.
next item on my thing.
Okay.
So as to, I mean, you're raising an excellent question. Who should be writing these things? And in the end, it's the commissioners that are gonna write these things. But my impression has been that we want to give them a product that they can work with, readily work with. And so
And we think we're
My
pretty
com-
darn ready.
my concept is that, this
Yeah.
is the way we get to that
And
product.
to answer your question, I think ours is a draft that we feel is pretty much ready if you submit the two and they can work out some details together.
So here's what I have in mind. I think we need to refine it a little bit.
I need to make some corrections.
And I'm not saying that the content or the intent of what you're doing, because I'm gonna be open about this. I mean, I think I was clear at the last meeting when 3 of the 5 people decided that we needed to go in a little different direction, and I accepted that. And I'm, ready, willing, and able to continue the process in that way. But I think this document needs to be refined a little bit, and I'm ready to get into that later this morning.
Okay,
So.
so you're thinking we should refine this and no longer refine the other code?
I'm not
Is that
willing
the-
to give up on the other one, so we'll talk about that in a minute.
What does everybody else think?
I'm ready to give up on the other one.
You are? Okay.
I want
All
to
right.
give.
I'm ready to
Okay.
give up on the other one.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. When I say give up on the other one, I'm talking about what's in the other one, not necessarily the way it exists. Okay?
Some of the concepts in it or the principles.
I'm ready to give up on
Right,
the other one
right.
completely as it is
Right.
and bring
I
forth
agree.
whatever the city arborist and the
That's
building
good.
official and the mayor and city council think we left out. Or that
Yeah.
we
Right.
altered so badly that it doesn't fit where the direction
Sure.
they were headed.
I also think one thing we need to talk about at some point is whether we should have this referred to use your language, a code writer, before or after it's reviewed by city officials.
Okay.
The reason for that is an independent person reading and writing and doing something without regard to the staff will do something that should be neutral. There's no way a staff person can do something that's neutral because they've got their job that they're doing, and that always
Okay.
makes their reaction biased in some fashion or another. I think the commission would love to have something that was independent as well.
Okay.
And-
Gene, I'm inclined to agree with you.
So am I.
Because I mean, you're never gonna take politics out of the business, but we can at least present something that's kind of devoid of that, or as much as
Or
possible.
minimize it.
Minimize that. I think the challenge is, where do we find a code writer and who pays for
Yeah,
it?
but we don't worry about that.
Okay.
We're gonna make
we
that
gotta ask.
recommendation. No,
Okay.
that's not our job.
Plus, in all honesty, every
Yeah.
time I read even what I wrote, you know, there's I should maybe put this here or put that, you know what I mean? It's never ending. I mean, you could
Yeah.
read this, we spent hours and
Okay.
hours and hours on this, and it got to the point where that's where the red line came from. I finally said, you know what, Sturgis, I'm not,
And then,
I'm
and then
comfortable
your
with
second
mine.
document.
Yeah.
Right.
And
sure.
basically, the document that has the red line in it also has blue line. And basically, what we tried to do is I tried to leave the blue line was my thought, hers was red, it got kind of confusing. I was like, let's just submit 2, because there's gonna probably be 5 by the time it's over. But that's what a code writer will do and make sure, but every time I even read mine, I kind of go, you know, maybe that should be a different thing, but it's,
Getting a code writer is not gonna be difficult,
Yeah.
frankly.
Okay.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, I
The
know.
general code publishers do that.
Well, they gave us one that we haven't gone through yet. And we probably shouldn't because it reverts to the old code. But the General Assembly here in Delaware doesn't have as good a committee to do writing as they could, but I've got a good friend that's on the Virginia Senate
Oh, okay.
Code Writing Committee.
I'm actually talking about
They
the,
are professional writers, and that's
Yeah.
all they do,
this code 360 that our online
right?
code is. They do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think most of the stuff that they did in their review was correcting errors,
I
as
agree,
opposed
but
to
they'll write a
philosophical
code
stuff.
for you too.
right?
well, I am very curious to hear what Liz has to
All
say.
right, well, hang on.
Very
We'll
curious.
get there in a minute.
Because we never talked to her as we were
Yeah.
doing
We
this,
didn't.
and
We
I was
really
kind of
didn't.
hoping we would.
I haven't read any of, or.
Oh, you haven't even
Okay.
read it?
Okay, well, let
Okay,
me,
well,
let
never
me
mind.
go on to my next point, which
Shoot.
is your next document.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to do some house cleaning here.
Yep.
So what I would ask, again, and I forget whether I sent this to you or not, but there
You did,
is
yeah.
an official,
Got it.
at least a link that I got for the town of Chevy Chase for their urban, whatever it's called, urban tree
Urban forest
program,
code.
whatever, yeah. That I think we should be using rather than a
Well,
copy of.
It's interesting because I saw your attachment, and strangely, this version, and I got this from,
From Julie.
thank you.
From Julie
Julie
Davis,
Davis,
yeah,
I just had a senior moment.
Right.
Julie Davis sort of handed over her
Right,
packet
right,
of things, and this was in her packet
Yeah,
of things.
right.
It looked to me from the difference between this version and the one you have is that this does not have the whereases that were at the kind of in the beginning. And the other thing that's strange is that yours copy, the one you sent me, was redlined with changes. And the changes, this is a clean copy with those changes.
And I think what I
So-
have, then I have not sent you the most recent thing.
Oh, okay. So my
Which I
thought
think
is, there's some version
It's
that
literally
looks
out
like-
of it's literally out of the city, the city of Chevy Chase, whatever it is,
Yeah.
website.
Got it, okay. I just sort of took what she had. And the reason I attached it without knowing how current or anything was, I figured it was good.
No, that's
to
what
have
you
it
guys
here.
use, that's
And,
good.
and it was sort of an inspiration to me because it seemed very simple.
Yep.
And it was written in the kind of language that I thought we were trying to approximate. The one thing I read when I was researching how do you go about writing a tree code, one of the recommendations was, if you decide to, and this is something we haven't done, this is a disclaimer, if you decide to adopt, a model from another jurisdiction, it would be wise for you to contact them and find out how successful they've been with that code.
Are you talking specifically about the
I'm
town
talking
of Chevy Chase?
specifically about the town of Chevy
Because
Chase.
Julie, talk to Julie.
Okay, does she live in the town of, or the village of?
I don't think they live there anymore,
Two
but
of them.
she did live there, and she participated in the
Okay,
creation process.
Okay.
so.
got it. That wasn't something
I don't
that I
know.
was aware.
The details, I mean, they may have used a professional.
It'd be an interesting, and it's something that I thought to do and that I might
Right.
actually give them a buzz and say, is this working for you? Or, have you been caught up because it's not specific or detailed enough or something? Has there been some flaw in this?
Okay.
I don't know how you all feel. And Susan, you can kind of weigh in. Personally, I would like to have Liz's feedback on this. And maybe Dom's feedback on this, maybe before I think that may be more productive than us,
Then further discussion this
than
morning?
further discussion this morning.
Oh, but,
I know we have this meeting,
Yeah.
but I'm just kind of saying, I don't know, Susan, how do you feel?
I'm gonna pick up what I
I mean,
got
unless there's
from
some specific.
Gene's inference earlier, and that is,
Uh-huh.
you know, we're looking for independent thinking here, and I think I would like to explore some of these issues.
Sure.
And then, you know, I would like to be able to offer my comment on, and Liz, at this point, when you hear what they're describing, then you can offer your reaction to these things as well. I mean, you might want to do it some other way, but.
Well, I can already comment on Chevy Chase because that was one of the areas I worked in for
There you
years.
go.
And I don't remember microphone or.
Yeah, come on up here. You just pull your chair.
Ann. Sorry, Ann. You mad at me?
I'm sorry.
No, I'm
no,
just
go
trying to think. I don't want to block.
Good.
I think it's that talks.
Yep.
So I worked in, that was part of the area I worked for years, and I don't ever remember having to get permits there, to be honest with you. I mean, we didn't take down a ton of trees, but it must be a large size, because I don't recall.
It's
Now-
24 inches in circumference.
That's why,
so
that's
4.5
not,
feet.
that's a minority, a tiny little blip of the trees that people take out are that size.
Because their code is specifically written to protect large trees. That's,
But
it's
you,
limited to that.
Chevy Chase is very different aesthetically from here. They have larger lots, they have huge historic district. It just, I mean, money-wise, the value of the property is maybe comparable, but I would not say that the owner, that the demographics and all that with our huge rental influx, most people in Chevy Chase live in Chevy Chase.
Can I just say one thing? I didn't read the Chevy Chase code, okay? So I think the only time that I read any part of that was when we were stuck for a way to say what we wanted to say.
Sure, okay.
So I don't think that played as big a part in what I did. I mean, does it need to be even referenced? I didn't even want to reference
No,
it, so
the only
if
thing.
it's just gonna muddy the waters, I think it doesn't even need, like I said, I think Sturgis read the whole thing. When I brought up Canopy several months ago, this is when I think you pulled the document and said, hey, there's somewhere else that Julie had found that did a Canopy thing, but I don't even know if, honestly, what did we take out of there? Very few words.
Not a lot.
So
I mean, to
I
me,
think
it was the
including it
inspiration.
probably is just muddying the waters.
So bottom
Yeah,
line,
yeah,
I think,
I don't
I
think
think what we
take it
want to do is, I think we
Flat
need to
track.
go from 2 documents to 1
Confused.
document,
Got it.
okay? And whether or not there's any reference to any other code, that's not really that relevant.
I agree with
So if you
Susan.
wanted to hash through it today, it would be a matter of taking what I have and what Sturgis has, reading them together and seeing if you guys wanted to add or change anything, and then we throw them into one document. I think that's the simplest way to do it, and if you have a specific question on maybe,
Yeah.
you know,
That's cool.
I think, because we're very, very close already.
And that's what,
And
I think we'll
If we had
get,
had honestly, another 8 hours together, we would have had one. But we just got to the point at 11 o'clock at night where it was like, we can't argue one more
and
point.
then I'm sending you a note saying,
Okay.
here's where
Right.
I'm going.
So I think, and honestly, it's probably good, because we
Yeah.
were kind of at a, you know, how far are we going with this? So with 3 other people voting on, you know, adding a little more information that Sturgis has, or leaving it out that I don't have, and then sending it to a code writer, and then sending it to the city, or vice versa. I mean, it's completely different than the code we have. Could not be any further from 10 pages of mitigation and measurements and this and this and this and this. You know, Liz is able to say, well, you know, I'd rather deal with 10 pages of measurement, and then we need to, you know, think about it. And I know from having been in a position like Liz's, you know, and anytime there's change, people are adverse to it. they don't like it in the beginning. They just don't like it.
That's right.
It changes the flow of how you've always done things. It makes things more difficult. And you can't ask somebody for at least a month, hey, now what do you think? I mean, even the smallest things, like changing a uniform or whatever, you're gonna get adversity from people that don't like change and that are set in their way. And it is work and it is effort to deal with changes. So I think you need a little think time before it
So go for it. And I did one little note. It's now 10:45 and I'm gonna need probably 10 or 15 minutes at the end of this thing to do setting our next meeting, whatever else I got in there. So, I mean, just keep that in mind as we go along. If we want to try and get through the whole thing, you've only got about an hour to do that, so.
I don't think you're gonna get through an
Okay,
entire tree
that's
code
cool.
in an
That
hour,
goes
but
back to my original statement.
but I mean, we
might
can
be
start-
setting things back, but that
we
could be
can
a good
start
thing.
with one, finding and purpose, and just start reading through
Yeah,
it
go
if you
for it.
want. And I think that's probably gonna
Go
be
for
the
it.
easiest one.
Yeah.
So I think I'll pull it
And
apart.
which one are we using?
Well, you look at both. Yeah, I mean, because it's Susan's voice and my voice.
There you
So,
go.
Yeah.
Who's going first?
I think everybody's reading it.
Do you want, oh, okay. Well, while they read, I'll give you my comments, because I've already pretty much, I'm good with whatever language you want to come up with. I think there needs to be an applicability section in there. That's just the legal beagle in me.
What does that mean?
but-
Wait, what's applicable?
Well, if you go back to just
not
about
gonna
every
be-
provision you find, there would be an applicability section to it.
Now, we gotta give them 5 minutes to read it. Yeah.
That's, I think the Board of Commissioners are gonna determine, the findings part of it. Purpose, I'm comfortable with the way that's characterized.
Did everybody read 25-1?
Everybody good?
Anybody have any comments on 25-1? Got two versions of it. Does it say what you think the city wants to, does it say what the comprehensive plan and the people of the town want? Is that their finding and purpose, I guess is the question. It's just one section. If we can all agree on which one we're keeping, then we can move on.
We really paraphrased what's in the current finding and purpose
Yeah.
and shortened it. That's where most of this language came from.
And the old code, basically, every time there was another finding, it just got added on, thrown in at the end, instead of rewritten into it, so it just became a whole list of,
But there's nothing in there about it being modified, is there? When they update it, they always put like amended.
I haven't,
Yeah, that's
I
just
think
like a
if
little
it's
thing at the
just-
bottom.
At the bottom of that section,
Yeah.
so it should say that.
Bottom of what section?
At the,
Code
the existing code.
section.
yeah.
Are we gonna pull out the existing code, or are we just gonna leave it? Go.
I mean, I don't think it's imperative because that is
Yeah.
through the commissioners.
Okay, yeah, let's
so.
maybe, we start pulling out the existing code,
Yeah,
we're
no,
probably
no,
gonna
no,
be
no,
all
no.
over.
Yeah, don't worry.
Okay,
Let the city
All right.
attorney earn his money on that.
so you got two versions,
You want me to say something?
yes.
While I agree with the sentiment of Sturgis's addition, I think it's not necessary. It's a little bit more wordy than it has to be, and it's almost repetitive of the concept. And if we're gonna be clean, I would go with the smaller,
The first part.
the Susan Wood number 2, whatever you wanna call it.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
I mean, the original does talk about what Sturgis added, though. That was the whole purpose.
Yeah, the tree code was actually written because of my sentence.
Yeah. So
And that's kind of why.
whether or not the thing can be.
Whether or not we need it or not is, you know, I think Pete and Susan both have a point. You know, it is in the interest of,
I'm not opposed to leaving it in if it needs to stay in. It's just more words, but I think it does,
Still less than
again.
the original.
And the Sturgis's point is she wants to make sure whoever gets this next and rewrite it doesn't miss the meaning of it. And I was just assuming that they would already know what the meaning of it is, the mayor and city council. And so that's, again,
When they do these things, there's a resolution, and the resolution could contain that language.
But that language is taken out of the charter, generally.
Huh?
That language is taken out of the charter, almost
This
entirely.
language here, they further find.
When you start with, when you look at the code sections, when they have its purpose, they're really going back to the charter, reciting what gives them the authority to do what they're doing.
oh, okay. All right, so we want to vote on 25-1? Hoyte, can you vote?
I'm good, whatever.
What did we vote on? On which version?
I guess we could just say which one we like. Is that gonna work, Hoyte?
I go either way. Yeah, no,
I'm
let's
just
do
kidding.
this. You guys are running the show. I'm just
We
saying.
are, we kind of. Just give me your chair. No, I'm kidding.
Well, what about an edited version of Sturgis's taking out part of it?
what would you
After
think?
the first comma, in the removal of trees, take out the and other human natural activity results in damage to trees. So you just say, growth and development often results in the removal of trees, making the regulation of trees necessary. So you take out two sections.
Perfect.
There you go.
Right. The growth and development often results in the removal of trees.
Trees, making the regulation of trees necessary. Good, in the middle compromise.
Beautiful, I love it.
Sounds like we're all in agreement with Liz's edit. Is that
I vote
Any-
A, yay.
okay?
Yep.
Liz edits accepted. The next part is species specifications, and what it says is permitted and prohibited species list are to be maintained and updated by the city arborist. Now, this is a couple of things that I've introduced. In addition, native trees must be native to southern coastal Delaware. That may or may not be the correct designation. It could be southern coastal plain of Delaware, I'm not sure. Mid-Atlantic coastal plain. High canopy trees must be native and must be able to attain a minimum height of, and I have amended this from my original, I've amended this up to 60 feet and a canopy spread of 20 feet at maturity. I started at 45 feet with a 20 at maturity based on some things, some thoughts that Liz had. The reason that I pushed it up to 60 is based on some material, Hoyte, that you sent me, which described an overstory tree as having a minimum height of 60 feet at maturity. And also looking in Liz's list of trees, the tree, I think there were very few trees, I'm losing my words. But I guess what I'm saying is that 45 or under, there really wouldn't be what I consider high canopy trees.
Basically, the only
Even
difference
50.
is one is 45 and you have now 60.
And I pushed it up to 60.
So I think that's gonna need to be somebody with a better knowledge of us than trees that can come up with that proper number. But if we get it down to that section without a number, then we're pretty darn close.
So anyway, what do y'all think about this?
I think doing the southern coastal Delaware is gonna be hard,
Okay.
because right now it just has native to Delaware.
I know.
And there are trees that are native, like a beech, that don't grow on the coast because of the salt. So when you add in southern coastal Delaware, we're supposed to determine that we'll have arguments because there will be no definitive thing besides the list we create. And then couple that with a 60-foot height, we're gonna be at a very small list of trees. And maybe that's okay, but it's just gonna be small.
Got it, and that is the high canopy tree. Because what we're looking at, when we get to the next, we're saying each lot, residential lot, has to have one high canopy tree.
Yeah, I mean, you'll pretty much say, looking at that, you have maybe some hickories that get up to 60 feet, which people aren't gonna want on their property because of the hickory nuts.
Okay,
Red and white oak,
okay,
and only certain varieties of them, because a lot of them will only get 45, 50, and loblolly pine.
okay.
I mean, there may be some other ones I'm missing in there, but it'll be a small list.
I believe your intent was Sturgis, if Sturgis had her way, we would have only anything that ever grew here planted. I was, and she had said that Delaware, northern Delaware trees shouldn't even be included because it's not even the same area, it's not growth area. And that, again, I was a little more lax, kind of saying, I think we need a few more options and a little bit shorter tree. So, again, I think, is that pretty much summarized where we got on that?
Kind of, I don't think I rejected northern, I was just saying that having Delaware trees maybe doesn't, I mean, and I'll tell you, Liz, kind of my inspiration for this in a sense of this thinking, and it's about river birches, okay? River birches are a tree that is showing up more and more in
They're popular.
in the town. River birch, I have never seen, this is my hometown. I've never seen a river birch in my life, okay? And river birches are being used to satisfy the current kind of deciduous tree, yeah. And that's the current, one of the current, tallest tree you have to have on your property.
Yeah.
So not only, and they get pretty tall. I mean, if people don't top them, which some people are doing, they get tall and they can overstory a house, but they're not native to this part of.
Yeah, but you go up to
Delaware.
like the Broadkill area, they're all over there in the floodplains and stuff. That would still be considered coastal Delaware, so.
So my
Yeah,
comment-
it's just.
But basically what we did though is we
Yeah,
gave
I
Liz
got
the
you.
authority to come up with a tree list. Sturgis would have probably liked to included some of the tree lists actually in
I
here.
actually would have.
And she did have the list in there, and I said, look, we've already said Liz is gonna make a list.
Right.
Then you need to talk to Liz separately and say, these are the trees that are gonna go on it, and that would be a whole nother discussion that would be had, but not part of the code.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
and also I'm looking at things that maybe aren't part of the code, and I know Liz already does this. Liz is a great advocate for preserving certain kinds of trees in certain places in town when people come to her for
Try to convince them.
yeah, and I love to see, I mean, one of the things that Susan and I disagreed upon, but I would like to see our entire town have a tree and landscape plan, not just for public areas, but for the town as a whole, because we're a 1 mile square ecosystem. And most of our trees grow currently on private property. You have parks, but most of them grow on private property. So I would love to see Liz, supported and empowered to encourage people to plant trees that are characteristic and that have the highest value in terms of habitat support.
I mean, we could do a list of approved trees and then have some with asterisks that are recommended.
So
without regulating.
Elsewhere in your provisions, and I'm
We
not
have
sure where,
her writing the list.
Well,
yes.
no. You have the term permitted tree. You've
Right,
got that in there. So I don't know whose edition it is, but it's in there somewhere. I remember it.
Okay.
And so, I mean, that could be part of the list that evolves from this.
And in our draft, that list has to be updated annually and reviewed. So it's not something that,
Let's
we
talk
threw
about
a little
that
bit
when
on
we
you
get to
there,
it.
Liz. So.
Let's talk about that
Yeah,
when we get to it.
so I guess the question is that if we're gonna go with this and not add the specific names of the trees here, we need that number, 45 or 50, 60.
I need to jump ahead a little bit
Okay.
because my question, as it relates to what you're requiring, is it practical?
Got it.
I mean, if you're going to say that you need to have 3 trees on the lot, which is coming.
Right.
And at least one of those trees has to be a high canopy tree, which is a 60-foot tree.
Right.
And my sense was, you want even more. It may not be required, but you're lining this up so that there's gonna be more than one canopy tree. And I don't see how that's
No,
practical.
There's
Okay.
no
Not
there's
required,
no
And so-
but we would
so-
like to keep them.
So the other
Yeah.
2 trees can be permitted trees then?
No, you have to read it exactly. There's 2 different kind of trees. We're gonna be there in 1 second. though.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll wait.
I think right now all we need is a number.
I'll wait.
Can I ask a question about?
Yeah.
2 questions. One is about canopy. That seems to be the whole thrust of this new proposal.
Yep.
Yeah.
So is it less important to talk about tree height and more important to just have the canopy spread?
No, that was my question too, not being a tree knower, but basically you could have a very short, fat tree that doesn't do the same as a
Well,
tall.
45 versus 50 versus
Yeah,
55,
but-
but now you're talking more than 2
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
And my other question is, recognizing that you want to keep everything native to Rehoboth, I mean, there could be trees out there that are in northern Delaware or West Virginia that grow to be 75 feet and have gorgeous canopies, and you don't want to exclude those, do you? If they're accomplishing what you want to accomplish. I mean, there is change, just like this is a change. You know, there could be a tree that's out there that you wouldn't want to prohibit if it was the perfect tree to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish.
Good point. Good point.
Part of, this is why I really want Liz to, to really look at this. And, one of my concerns, and it's inspired by, we had I'm a member of the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Trees, and we recently had a speaker, a gentleman named Doug Tallamy from University of Delaware. And one of the things that he just really stressed was the importance of native species in terms of, what he says is that landscaping has our idea about landscaping has been more about appearance, aesthetics, than it has been about sustaining, wildlife and sustaining habitat. And he just thinks that it makes sense to have trees in an area that support the wildlife that are here and that are migrating through here. So I don't know quite how we'd get at that. I take your point.
And
I
someone
take
can
your
plant
point.
one of those. It just can't be one of the 3 that you have to have.
Yeah, I mean,
So if
what-
you wanted
what
to
we-
add a tree, you could add it.
What we've
It's just
said
that
is
to
a high
count the 3, you
canopy, a
need one of
native,
those.
and then a other,
Yeah.
a other.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, then you get to have your whatever.
So I was in Hilo, Hawaii here a few weeks ago.
Okay,
I'm gonna send you a picture of my wife standing underneath a mimosa tree.
okay.
This mimosa tree had a canopy radius of, I'd say about 60 feet. 60 feet on a mimosa tree, okay?
I'm not, I mean,
And that's an invasive tree, by the way.
I was wondering.
Still
I'm-
beautiful,
It's
but-
beautiful, but
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
I think that's. that
Salt
is-
tolerant
that's it.
and.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, we have 50 by 100 lots. So having an immense canopy, to me, is not as necessarily interesting as having, oh gosh, I don't know. Height and canopy.
Why is
So-
that important?
Why is that important? Because of the unique wooded seaside appearance of the town.
60
as well as-
versus 45?
Well, if you look at Liz's tree list, what you'll see is that there are not that many trees.
Well, and you have to keep in mind too that it's mainly cultivars being planted now. So you may say a river birch can grow to 60 feet.
Right.
If they're planting like a Durahite or a Heritage, which are the common ones you find, they're not going to get to 60 feet.
Got it. Yeah.
They'll be 45.
Are you definitely not okay with 45?
I don't think I'm okay with 45, because my feeling is if we want a high canopy tree and we let people not have a high canopy tree, they're gonna go for a smaller tree.
What's the height restriction on houses? What's the highest they can go?
35.
35 feet.
Okay, so it's 10 feet taller than a house.
Got it.
How about 50, Sturgis? Come on.
Let me show you let me just show you the tree list. And this is the thing that kind of informed.
Remember, we're trying not to make it too hard for people to be able to do it, and then they weren't not gonna argue
Absolutely.
with it.
I mean, if it's not practical, if it won't work, and you have a good, you have a good question. And this is where I think we really need Liz's expertise to say, can a mint tree that reaches 60 feet in height?
What
at
would your number
minimum,
be, Liz?
Can it thrive on a 50 by 100 lot?
What would your number be? If you had to put one number in there,
To say a canopy tree,
that's gonna live, survive the
It's
winds.
gonna-
probably like 40 to maybe 50, because when you start saying 60, that means no red maple cultivars, because they only get 40 to 50. So you start, the higher you go, you start eliminating a lot of trees that you may think of as,
Loblolly goes 61.
they'll go 100 if you
Yeah,
want them
right.
to.
Right.
So what trees are excluded if you go from 45 to 60? I think that might be the way to approach it.
And it doesn't mean people are gonna pick the ones that only go to 45, it just means they have to pick at least one that goes to 45.
Yeah.
They might say, no, I'd rather,
I don't know.
you make it hard, they're gonna find all kinds of ways to get around it and avoid it.
But it should be definable and it should be easy to define.
And
And
easy.
right now, it seems to me we're getting to be difficult to define.
But I mean,
You've
if-
got two trees that are the same species, and you plant them next to each other, one of them could grow 10 feet higher than the other. I mean, just because you say it's gonna be 50 feet doesn't mean the trees are gonna end up being 50 feet.
The
Who
less,
who is gonna
the
actually
less
measure
space.
the final tree?
The less
How do you do
space
that?
you have, the smaller the tree will be. So you may say, we're gonna plant this tree in the 4-foot wide right away. Oh, that tree grows to be 60 feet tall. It will not grow to be 60 feet tall there. It'll get to 40. So you have to take all those, or if you're in a non-protected environment where the wind's constantly whipping in, so like Rehoboth Avenue, those, you can see how they've altered to the wind. They're not gonna reach their full height ever because of it.
Got it, got it. I guess when I was looking at this list, and I think this is Liz's, is this your current list, Liz?
Yes,
Does that
that was
look like
taken
it?
from the state of Delaware.
Okay. Kind of what you'll see here is, let's see,
But that's also things that are growing where you don't have 60, 70 mile per hour winds on a regular basis coming
Yeah.
through too, so you have to kind
a
of.
beech starts at 50, let's see, a black birch, 45. What do we got here? Da-da-da-da. And then, let me see, a loblolly, white and loblolly is 60 and 70, eastern red 50.
Well, a good example would be, say, like your willow oak. In the south, willow oak can be like 100, 125 feet tall. Here,
Okay.
you rarely see them above 50, maybe 60 max.
Okay.
Could we amend the language rather than even having a footage? If all these large trees in the old code, and I don't want to refer to the old code,
Right.
if they all have the potential to be 60 feet, because I glanced at your list and compared it to this list real quick, the large trees, can't you just say, high canopy trees must be specified as large trees having a canopy of 20 feet, and that would not put a number of the height, but the list would have to be something that is in that area?
Yeah, I don't see why you need it. I mean, if the approved trees are on the list and the list is classified, these are canopy trees and you have to have one, why do you really need a height?
Sturgis really wants to protect the native tall trees is what this boils down to.
It's true,
She wants to protect the native tall trees. She wants it to look like it looked,
like it looks now.
like it looks now. And she's
But
concerned.
the list
So
could
when
have
you
the
made the
number.
list, that is what she would be hoping that you would put on it and that it would stay that way. And I'm sure that's what the mayor and city council would want. She just doesn't want somebody, if you leave, coming in and rewriting that tree list and putting
Well,
a
I
bunch
mean,
of.
something like that would have to go through an approval process,
Which
whatever
is
that
we're the native
is.
to southern coastal Delaware. If we said native to Delaware again and left a height of 45 feet, can we leave native to southern coastal Delaware?
How are we gonna define that? Who's gonna decide what's native to southern coast of Delaware?
I don't know.
That's why you're getting the
That's-
big bucks, Liz. We're gonna let you
I mean,
decide.
it's interesting, Doug Tallamy, who
just-
was here, was a speaker, he's an entomologist, he's not a plant person, but he kind of referred to coastal plain, he referred to, and I don't know what, you know, I'm not an expert either, but it suggested there might be some kind of,
Well, they have all the plant
Category.
communities in Delaware listed online. There's like a bajillion of them. So you go through and look at them to maybe craft your list and looking at some different
Could
coastal
you
ones.
come up with a list of things native to southern coastal Delaware?
Yes, but that doesn't mean it would,
But do you feel that you've been here long enough and
There
you've seen enough
wouldn't-
to know kind of what was?
there wouldn't be any research to back up whatever whatever I came up
Got
with.
it.
Do you know what I mean? There, like with the native to Delaware, we have literature that backs up this tree is native to Delaware.
right,
With this southern coastal Delaware, like, and unless you give me an information source.
What's the tree you don't want? There's one tree you really don't
Well,
want.
I'm not crazy about river birches.
River
We all
birch.
know that.
And that is probably the most
Excellent
planted
river
and
birch.
landscaped
That is-
tree.
I know.
Because, and they do support a variety of wildlife. I will say that. The songbirds love them.
That's
So,
good. I
I-
like that.
So
Do they get your height?
That's gonna be
They
on the
don't get the
permitted
height,
list.
you know, they don't get on the height.
Yeah.
But we wanted to support
Um,
wildlife was a huge part
we
of
do,
of
but I
this,
want both.
So,
You know, I want
all right.
Well, I think part of the reason people plant river birches too is that they're inexpensive and easy to find.
So just a
Yes.
reminder, you're on the second item. We're about almost
Well, this isn't gonna
Halfway
happen
We're
quick,
not-
Hoyte. I mean,
Oh,
we only get
okay.
through two
I'm-
items
I'm
today. We get through
quite
two items,
willing to-
but, I think we're gonna have to vote though, Sturgis, on a height.
I think
And
we
Delaware.
need to be generic. When we start getting specific, we don't control trees, how much they grow.
Yeah.
So by being specific, I think we're limiting ourselves and putting people in jeopardy.
We got a minimum though.
Native
We
is
say a
good.
minimum height.
Well, here's the
Native?
question.
Native to what?
Well, I don't know, native to
That's-
Delaware.
Do we even need any of that? Why can't we just say permitted species are the ones on the list? The list has to go through an approval process.
Because Sturgis is afraid that somebody's gonna come in and just not.
But they would have
not
to
push
have,
the native
they would
point.
have to have the approval, the support of wherever that list is approved. So whether that's the commissioners or some sort of committee or the city manager.
Is there a state list that we can refer to that is independent of Rehoboth Beach?
How about coastal Delaware, not southern Delaware? How about coastal Delaware? Take out
Yeah, I
southern.
don't know whether Liz would say there's
I just
such a
think you're
thing.
really just like funneling down to like 5 trees here. That's my problem with it. And I
I
find
know,
it.
that's what she wants to do.
I'm
This is
gonna-
why we had to
I'm-
stop at 11 o'clock. I'm like, Sturgis, we're not on the same page here. We gotta stop.
I
because
think
we
that'll
have
be
to-
hard to defend,
Yeah.
hard to enforce.
I know what you're doing.
Because I think you'll be getting
I'm
constant
sorry, I knew this was
arguments.
gonna happen. That's why I said you had to.
Because also,
I'll be okay.
whose height?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm looking at
Yeah.
this book that I use, UFL, and considered an expert, but maybe somebody's looking in so-and-so's book, and here it says it can get to 50 feet, and mine it says 45. So who's gonna win that
right.
argument?
What if we go to Delaware with a minimum height of 45? Native to Delaware.
I mean, at some point, Liz, you introduced in some of your notes
Mm-hmm.
a concept of defining a high canopy tree as able to attain a minimum height of 45 feet with a canopy spread of 20 feet.
And that is
in maturity. And
generally generally consumed a tall tree is 45.
okay.
The width is also a big issue because we're getting more and more. I heard somebody refer to him, one of my nursery guys, as a nativar, so a cultivar of a native plant. So green pillar oak. It's a cultivar of a native oak, but it only grows like 15, 20 feet wide. Of pin oak. Pin oaks grow 50 feet wide. So does that
You
still
mean-
fit your definition?
The canopy.
Yeah, they're the columnar ones.
Yeah.
So they, like an Armstrong red maple, can get 50, 60 feet tall, but it only gets 15, 20 wide, max.
And you're gonna make the list, and you're gonna put a lot of thought and effort into it.
Well,
and
you
it's
guys
gonna
have
be
to
looked
give
at.
me, we have to know what you
Right.
what we want. Do we want to include those cultivars? Do we not want to? That's where the,
Well, I mean,
In the
my
creation of
thought
the
is
list.
a high canopy tree is a tree with a canopy, and it's, so I don't want a columnar variety of,
well, if
you
you're
know.
going to have, like, I mean, even a red bud has a canopy. They can grow 30 wider than they do tall,
Mhm.
you know? So,
But how tall does a redbud get?
I mean, I've seen them 50 feet tall, but commonly 25.
Let me suggest also, while we're thinking about this, that the commission, when they get this, are not gonna pay a damn bit of attention to all this discussion we just had. They're gonna have people standing in line, coming up saying, I wanna do this tree, I wanna do that tree, I wanna do this tree.
Right.
That's why we need to be generic, because they're not gonna have the opinions that we've got that are based on experience or whatever. They've got what they're hearing from the people out there.
Which is why there's no list in this code.
Right, there
All
shouldn't
we
be.
need to do right now is set a guide for Liz to create the list.
To me, the
That's all
guide
code needs to do.
is right there. Number one, we're talking about high canopy and native species that support wildlife, contribute to the welfare of the city. Do we need to put actual heights and sizes on it? I don't know.
So 253-2 is a guide to the city arborist, and that's
Yes.
all it is.
Exactly.
So can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Please.
Permitted and prohibited species listed are to be maintained, reviewed and updated annually by the city arborist, period. Native trees must be native to Delaware or coastal Delaware. High canopy trees must be native and able to maintain a minimum height of 45 feet and a canopy spread of 20 feet at maturity. And then that will give her the guidance she needs to put together her list.
I mean, you pretty
This
much
is
already
not
have,
for, this is not for a resident.
you pretty much already
homeowner.
have the list. You'll just have a couple crossed off. I mean, so London Plain will be technically crossed off. If you really want to get technical, it's not native because
How about native
sycamore
to
is.
Delaware, preferably southern coastal Delaware?
No room for preferable in the code. That doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Gotcha.
Like I said, we can star, if you guys come up with a list of recommended trees out of the approved ones, we can star them. People look for suggestions all the time when I give them a
So
list.
just a
Okay.
little side
All right.
note, that some of these things, you could argue that it happens here, are statements, and they need to be requirements. So we
The
can't
code
just say
writers can take care of
preferably,
that.
you have to say
Okay.
shall be.
Yeah.
In addition, native trees must be native to what? We gotta come up with something. Southern
I
coastal
think
Delaware,
Pete- I
coastal
think Pete
Delaware,
got
or
it.
just
Well,
Delaware?
he kind of said Delaware, and then he said,
Or coastal
or
also.
coastal,
Yeah,
and.
he's giving you an option.
Native to Delaware,
I mean, I guess ideally you want to say native to Rehoboth Beach.
Or,
Right.
yeah, I kind of do.
Exactly, right. So we have to find a compromise between that and what's happening.
I still think the answer is leave Delaware, if that's how
And take
specific we
out
want to be.
take out southern.
Take
Yeah.
out southern and coastal.
All
And then
I
you
would
guys,
vote for that,
if
too.
you have
All right.
certain trees that you think do
I
really
think
well,
that's a
we
good
can,
idea.
we can star them in the plant list and say
Okay.
recommended for coastal areas.
Got it.
Can we leave the 45 for now?
Yep, yep.
Oh, yay. Okay,
can
number
do it.
2 is done. Okay. Considering we haven't been able to get one section done in 10 months, I think we've gotten 2 done, so we're doing pretty well
Good.
here. All right,
Clank.
all right. All right, so the next section, minimum property requirements, was our way of summarizing, getting rid of Article 1. Okay, Article 1 and Article 2 of the code. One was for city-owned, one was for residential. We tried to separate this and then just threw in some things here that we thought were important to each section. This one's probably one of the tougher ones. And I think, again, we're pretty darn close on what we had here.
Why are you using the term property? What's wrong with minimum tree density? We're talking about trees here.
We are, but we have to separate it into, like, instead of zoning, like in the zoning code, you have residential R1, R2, C1, C2, blah, 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 blah.
Well,
There's
that's an
certain
issue,
things
too.
that only apply, like city-owned property was a whole article itself. Article 1 was all about city-owned property, okay?
I believe we
Non-residential use
eliminated that in
property
our.
is everything else. There's multi-use property, which would be either, we're throwing that under residential use. Okay, multi-use property
So
and
what would like a residentially zoned property that rents rooms be?
residential. Okay,
And what would an apartment downtown above a drugstore be?
residential. It has a residential use on it.
I think
And
you'll
that-
need to,
that's
So
an
it's not what
absolute
it's
conflict-
zoned,
That's
it's,
absolute conflict with the zoning code.
yeah, I think you'll need to
Right.
clarify
Yeah,
that
so-
language.
well, we figured we hadn't done the zoning code yet. So that was, again, they're all kind of flow together. So if there's gonna be changes to the zoning code, which the biggest thing in the zoning code is those multi-use properties and what they're debating now with the apartments over and all that, so.
Well, right
Um,
now.
Sounds like the tail wagging the dog.
Well, right now they have, what is it, single-family residential is what the, like, 3 trees are supposed to apply for.
We were trying to expand it to,
And then beyond that, it has dwelling units, which when I first started, I had to get a definition from both Dom and our city solicitor about what constitutes a dwelling unit.
so we were actually getting a little more strict than and trying to include any property that has a residence on it.
A dwelling unit.
A dwelling unit, yes, a dwelling unit.
So
So
when you start talking dwelling units, apartment complexes, those are multiple dwelling units.
Yes.
I think Glenn said, and I
Yes.
could be getting this a little bit wrong, but if I remember right, he said, cooking, sleeping, and
Right.
maybe eating facility. It's defined in the code what a dwelling unit is.
So dwelling units come up in the context of multiple structures
Or single apartment building.
or one unit with multiple units
If
in
you
it.
have a kitchen,
And so, excuse me,
Cooking
and
area,
so the original code required 3 trees for each, three trees for 5,000 square feet and 2 trees for every dwelling unit. Okay?
Yeah, so 3
which
trees for
meant-
single
Which
family.
meant that if you had a property with 2 dwelling units on it, you needed minimum of 4 trees.
Yes.
Okay, and, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we gotta get away from dwelling unit as an issue. I think what we need to do is take a look at the property itself and what's gonna be practical for getting however many trees, 2, 3, whatever.
And that's what we were trying to do here.
And I recognize
Yeah,
that,
I think mixed use, especially in commercial, is where it gets to be a problem. But what we looked at was what the building code said for R2. And R2 has sufficient setbacks that I think Susan and I thought that the same formula for, every residential use property must have a minimum of 1 healthy existing tree or 1 newly planted per 1,666 square feet of land. So essentially, what we do is take 5,000 square feet divided by 3. And so we thought that there should be there would be room on multiple unit properties in R2 that they could have. Instead of having the number of trees tied to the number of units, it would be to the size of the lot.
So-
Isn't that
I think
what
that's
we were-
fair.
That's
So-
what we thought made more sense and was fair. The place where we get in trouble is where you have mixed use and commercial, where you've got 100% coverage of lot, and you've got an apartment or 2 upstairs.
Well, on new, it's a little bit harder because they have to provide those 2 parking spaces and most people
That's
don't do the
another issue.
garage.
Right.
But I
But
mean,
these are
Yeah, let's just stick
existing-
with the
these are
trees.
kind of existing, kind
I
of.
wanna go
think
back
there's-
and ask
there's a
why.
There's a reason why the commission left out commercial properties in the tree code.
Right.
Because the zoning code trumps the tree code. Because the zoning code is based on state law.
and that's why we wrote non-residential use property. Non-residential use properties, however you want to call them, don't have any minimum property requirements. Because you can't, it's just with 0 property line, you can't. Now, if you have one that you're going to put an apartment on top of, all of a sudden, now you're talking something that you may actually have to go to the Board of Adjustment and get a variance or something for, or, because then it becomes an issue, but we're trying to make it that if there's gonna be a residence, somehow, if at all possible, there's gonna be trees of some sort. But knowing that commercial can't do that, and like I said, the big thing now is everybody's gonna try, and honestly, it's gonna happen. People are gonna start trying to add apartments on commercial buildings because the retail spaces aren't as lucrative as they were
We've
before.
been trying to do that for 30
Okay.
years.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's just the way it's gonna be. I mean, the residential properties are making more money than a lot of the commercial ones. So, you know, if they wanna put an apartment on top of 7-Eleven or what, Rise Up, an apartment building up there, all of a sudden now it's gonna be, okay, well, now you're a residential use property, you gotta give us some trees.
You gotta
That's
pay,
kinda-
so what we've
That's
done.
kinda where we were going with it.
So what we've done in the past, and there's been very, very few cases, one of them, they actually have some green space because they have backup to residential, so there is a little bit, and they have a dwelling unit. So they had room to put in 1 or 2 trees,
Is that the one on Wilmington, the new
Yep.
one?
and then they pay a fee in lieu of mitigation and move on. That's what it is. So you're still paying your own way. We recognize you can't put the trees in. We're not forcing you to redesign your building, because like you said, zoning code, you can build lot line to lot line typically, but you still gotta contribute.
But if you can,
You're
need
not
to
out
put
of
'em
the
in.
requirement. Yeah.
Like say
you're
my
not out of
property, say the Grub
requirements.
property, okay? If I wanted to put an apartment above the Grub building, I could get a tree on my parking lot. There's a way to do it, you know what I mean? There's room to get a tree there. So I wouldn't get the exception granted to me or the mitigation granted to me. They'd say, look, you gotta put a tree somewhere.
Well, if you had green
know?
space, yes,
Yeah.
but we wouldn't expect you to dig up your
But
parking
why
lot
not?
to
I mean,
install
you
one.
could. I mean, I'm not. You
Because
could.
you are allowed 100% coverage.
Right.
So we can't force you to
But-
undo
But
that.
now now I'm making it a residential use though, so.
Yeah, but you're still allowed that coverage. Now
Right.
you could say, hey, you have options. You could dig out a 5x5 and stick in a red bud,
Right.
and that would cover one of your trees.
Or
and
you
it's up,
can pay.
It's up to you if you
Okay.
want to do that.
So.
But I would say we're trying to
would like
push for
get
the trees more than the payment.
I'd like to get some thoughts from the two guys over here about minimum tree density versus minimum property density. And also picking up on what Liz just said. I'm struggling here because you've boiled this down to 2 definitions, high canopy and native. And I'm seeing issues or terms, non-residential, residential use property, non-residential use property, non-conforming residential use property, city-owned property, property line trees. And all those are begging to me for definitions. And, you haven't defined these things. You're using these terms without saying what their meaning is. So, gentlemen, minimum tree density versus minimum property density and all these definitions, what's your thoughts on that?
As long as we stay in the residential realm, I have less of a problem with it. But what I would like to avoid is having a war between business people and the residential people.
Okay.
How would you see that, Gene?
There are tons of people in this town who want to go with multiple use properties. We've been trying it for 30 years. The zoning code was supposed to have solved it and it made it worse. Zoning code is going to be rewritten, and it's going to be rewritten soon. Just because it's gotten to the point now where there's too much people at loggerheads with each other.
Now, again, I'm gonna need a definition of what you just said. Are you talking about in a residential, like R1 or R2 neighborhood, putting up multiple
If you're in an R2,
dwelling units or however we wanna?
if you're in an R2, you're going to have less of a problem because it's pretty much built up. I don't think you're going to find very many places where you can add anything. But you would be able to have a problem there when you've got townhouses which can be built in R2 but can't be built in R1.
So let me give you an example. There's a guy 2 doors up from me,
Okay.
and he's got one building on a 155-foot lot, deep lot, okay? And essentially what he's got is 2 units with a breezeway, with a walkway that goes over. Now, he rents this property all the time. but he has never rented to more than one renter.
So it's a single
But the
unit.
way it's constructed, because I was there when it was built, is it's a distinct, it's got its own, kitchen, it's got a bedroom, got a bathroom. He calls it his pool, whatever, I forget what it is, because there's a pool there too. But clearly, this would be, 2 units that would be available for renting.
Which would fall under residential use property, as per what we wrote.
It sounds like he's trying to do R2 and an R1
And again, it doesn't matter if it's
he's-
R1, it's R2, it's
I mean,
whatever.
I'm not,
Again, we're
I'm not
only
being
asking for
critical of the
3
guy, I'm
trees.
just saying, that's,
I don't think it's.
Okay. We're
I don't
only asking
remember.
for 3 trees that are going to meet these requirements at some point in their life, all right? So whether it's R1, R2, multi, whatever, like I said, the bottom line is if there's a residence there, we're trying to get a tree. Now, we could, if you wanted, from non-residential, we could go to commercial, or we could put another section in about the multifamily thing, but I think since it's not even finished in the zoning code, it could be something that's added later when they figure out what they're doing with the zoning. But basically, all we're saying is 3 trees. You gotta remember, this isn't crazy, you can't take anything down anymore. This is something that can be met. So basically what it says, if you have a residential use property, you have to have 3 trees, all right? Up to 5,000 square feet. If you go over 5,000 square feet, you need to add another tree. That's what the 1,666 is. All right, the first tree and the 4th tree, if it's applicable, all right, need to be a native high canopy, okay? The second has to be a high canopy or a native, and the third can be any permitted species from Liz's list, okay? We even put something in saying, look, if there's 2 high canopies right on the property line between 2 properties, okay, then we'll count them as one of the trees. We want to save those. Then that got into a little bit of a legal issue that we weren't sure what to do with based on who, and I think Sturgis, you added some documentation, or we.
Well, I added a line.
She added a line that probably has to go in there. And then basically, if you have a residential property, okay, and it's there. When do you, and you don't have anything, when do you have to change it? You have to change it when, one, you get a building permit for something that's gonna cover more ground, a deck, a shed,
How much
whatever.
more? Any more?
Any more.
Okay.
Any more ground. Okay, hopefully you already have your 3 trees, but if you don't, now's the time you're gonna have to go out and buy something that's gonna grow to 45 feet someday. That's not the end of the world for anybody, okay? 2, and this is from my building code background, the extent of the renovation, basically in the building code, if you make more than a 50% change in what you're doing, like if you have a house and you completely gut it, even though it's not covering more ground, you've gutted it and you're doing all new wiring, all new flooring, it's over 50%, that constitutes a new structure by building code, and if it had to be sprinklered or something else. So at that point, you gotta get a couple more trees on your lot. All right, and 3, a transfer of property ownership occurs. All right, and it's possible. In other words, Sturgis sells me her house and there's room for a tree. Sturgis sells me her house and 100 years ago, the house covered every square inch of the lot. It's not possible. And those were the instances where you had to get your 3 trees. If you had a non-residential use property, basically it's all commercial, that's the way it is, okay? Then you don't have to do anything, all right? If you have a non-residential use property and you want to put an apartment on top, okay, then you'd have to go back to use this residential use requirements. If you can't, then you're going to have to go talk to the board about what's going to happen, okay? City-owned property is completely ruled by a tree and landscape plan that the city arborist and mayor and city council update annually. So city property has to follow all the same rules as far as species and all, what kind, what height and all that kind of stuff, but it's done by a plan that is different. And that's the only way we designated between all of them.
so, what
Does
I'm
that
hearing
kind of
is,
explain it?
you're gonna have a property transfer, and if there are not 3 trees on that property, the new owners are gonna be required to plant
Yes,
The current
3
code,
trees?
the current
Yes.
code
So,
says
if there's
it's
any
Tell
way-
me how you're gonna do that.
Okay.
It would
That's-
have
I
it
would
would have
love
to
to
be
know.
the
That's
older
where
one.
she had a whole lot of words explaining
did.
it, and I'm like,
Want
let
to
them
know.
figure that out.
Well,
No,
Figure it
because
out.
it can't, we've talked about it before and I don't see how.
there's
I
no,
think it's
there's,
impractical.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Can
it's a
you do it as
problem.
an attorney? Is there a way to have something that is attached to a property settlement here?
Yeah, but how are we
As-
gonna know? It's
Yeah,
not whether or
If
not it's a
if
concussion.
non-conforming, if it's non-conforming, you've got a problem with who's gonna be responsible. Generally, it's the seller, not the buyer.
Right.
And that means the sale's gonna go to hell, because the seller's not gonna spend the money.
Remember, you're only talking 3 small trees now, you're not talking
I
about
know you are,
a
but
zillion.
it doesn't matter.
But Jean, you're saying if a property sold, you're saying that there,
If it's
For some
legal,
reason-
if it's legal non-conforming,
it's legal
And you wanna sell it.
non-conforming. Right.
right now, it remains legal non-conforming on the other side
When
of
it
the sale.
goes to the new owner.
So we'd have to take 3 out.
What you're trying to say is, it's not gonna happen.
So you're saying that legally, as far as you understand it, that nonconformity should persist with the new owner?
Yes.
And that trying to impose this goes against your understanding of legal rights and the persistence
It's
of.
part of legal rights, but it's mainly market rights. And the market means the market's gonna go to hell. You're not gonna be able to sell the property.
But it seems impractical, but also think of it this way, if somebody built something, or say somebody put in a paver walkway without a permit, you need a permit's coverage.
Right,
Minor though,
okay,
that happens all the time.
right.
They go to sell the property, we don't go and do an inspection and make them rip everything out that was done without permits.
Got it.
Now, if they wanna move forward and do other things, there might be some issues, but we don't immediately go right to them.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to give up on number 3.
I think, and Susan and I have some different ideas about this, and this is one of them, in a sense, because how I read this in the current code, and what I think this is trying to do is to somehow have identified triggers that are practical or in some way to bring non-conforming properties into conformance with regard to tree planting. I have heard, Jean, I mean, to all of you, that the city doesn't have any way to be that they're not notified of transfers of property. So whether or not it's legal, as you're saying, it's impractical. Is that not so?
Well, the
That's how I
city-
feel.
The city
Way
does
I
get
feel.
copies of every deed that happens,
Yeah, there's just no
but it's after the
mechanism.
fact.
There's no mechanism that occurs, it just doesn't occur. Liz, what is your understanding of what the non-conforming properties being brought to? What is the rationale behind this in the current code? the way
Behind
it's
what?
Behind triggering, because it says 400, the current code says that if you do a renovation of 500 feet or more, then you must
Then
bring
that
your,
pulls in the tree
it
code.
pulls in the tree code. Then you have to bring your property
Well,
into conformance.
Because I think things like $20,000,
Uh-huh,
you can spend a lot more on windows.
uh-huh.
I know my parents do, and they put in windows.
Okay.
You have to come in conformance because you put in hurricane-proof windows?
Well, but I guess what I'm
So-
saying, here's what I'm saying, and because Susan, you're trying to, and this sort of makes sense to me, but that's why I'm trying to figure out what this is all about. You're trying to have this be a large redevelopment, or something that changes the footprint of the
Right,
structure.
covers more ground. Which
And-
honestly, when you
and-
think about it, Serge, if
Yeah.
somebody buys a new house,
Right.
80% of them are gonna come in for a permit to put something
For
that covers
something.
more ground. So if you got rid of 3, it wouldn't be the
But
end of the world.
what this is really for is some way to trigger like building and licensing that now you can inspect and now you can enforce.
Right.
Is that legal, Jean?
What I'm hearing you say is you're pretty much explaining what happens in residential properties.
Yeah.
Uh-huh,
Right.
yeah,
This is what happens in commercial properties.
this is, yeah. This
Have
is
a residential use.
This is under
This is
residential.
all about
It's all residential.
Residential use. You
Right.
keep saying residential use,
I
but that
got it.
also puts it in commercial
No,
zones.
I think the mixed
Right.
use thing is still something we haven't addressed
We may have to
adequately
do
here.
commercial residential.
We've got to figure out something to do about mixed use, okay?
Well, and don't forget, you have residential and commercially zoned property too, new residential and commercial zone,
That's true.
Right.
That's true.
so.
So that makes that a little more complex.
Right.
But I guess what I'm saying is, I think the intent of this in the original code and the intent here that we're bringing forward is that we would like every property in town to have a minimum of 3 trees. Just those that are non-conforming, how and when do we make that occur?
When somebody buys a house,
Yeah.
all of a sudden your tax bill gets changed to who the city's sending it to. Wouldn't that trigger that somebody else bought a new property?
The city gets a copy of every deed that's recorded in Suffolk
Okay,
County.
so they do know. Yours,
They do know.
okay,
So
so
they are, but
they do know.
So,
when.
so why isn't that used?
So would that trigger an inspection?
The transfer
to-
of property, why isn't that used as a trigger for?
Gene's saying
The
it's a
tree
market issue, it's gonna hurt.
Well,
the
but
real estate
also,
market.
why, even if the city knew about it, why would the city believe that there's gonna be something done? Because it may be bought and people not doing anything with it for 20 years.
They make people have to come in for a permit. We were stuck on this one.
Can we just say, I don't think,
What do you
I don't
think?
agree with it. I don't think just because somebody buys a property, all of a sudden they gotta put in 3 trees. And I think $20,000 is much too low of a
Okay,
number.
I borrowed
Let's
that.
do a vote. huh?
So we're
I
taking
mean,
out
we
the
did a vote on
transfer
number
one?
one, let's do a vote on this one.
Alright, so we gotta take out transfer. Number 3 comes out, is that, wait a minute, which one are we doing? You don't have a 3, yeah, 3's on both of ours. So we gotta give up on 3, Sturgis.
It
All right,
just
how about
doesn't seem
property
fair,
line trees?
honestly.
I'm thinking that's impractical too.
Counting them, I mean, I don't know what a legal agreement
Yeah.
would look like and then what the city's role in such legal agreement would be.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an easement.
If you don't count it,
If you want to do,
if
I mean,
you
it's
don't count
gotta
it,
be something.
you'll have more trees.
Yeah, but there
But some
are
places, the only
instances.
place you can get them is when they're, to
Yeah.
have a really nice tree that's split on a property line. I think we're trying to save those trees.
Yeah,
And not crowd them with another one that's not gonna grow under it,
Yeah.
so. I mean, I think if it's counted for both properties, I don't even know if you need an agreement. It's like you can count it, I can count it. Nobody can take down a tree on somebody
Well,
else's property
currently,
line without
the
checking
code-
with the other owner if it's splitting the line, right?
correct.
Yeah, it has to, both
So
people have to.
we don't
approve.
even
Currently,
need
well,
any of
the
the
current
other
code
wordage.
says that line trees may not be counted. That's what current code says, which is kind of why we put this in here.
Because what do? You count half of
Right.
one?
Yeah, I mean, they get 2 halves.
So my code
And then
doesn't have the
what's-
legal part, but yours does.
So now you got 2.5
Well,
trees?
so then say you come to me and you're like, well, I have a line tree, so I want to count half of it.
You can't
Whose
count half.
responsibility is it to inform the neighbor?
That's why I think there should be
Right.
some legal agreement that's
But
probably
then you're
on
getting the
file with
city and
city.
Impractical.
the city dealing with legal agreements between 2 parties about one line tree.
2 line trees.
2 line
They
trees.
gotta
has
have
to be
2.
minimum
That's
two.
They gotta
two.
have 2.
Yeah, you can't have
To
half
count
a
for
tree.
one.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah,
so
you
I
No,
just,
no.
there's no
You have to have
half a
2
tree.
trees.
You gotta-
So if you have 2 beautiful
halves
trees on the
equal
property
1
line,
for each of you.
they can count as your canopy tree. All right, they can count as your neighbor's
I
canopy
think we're
tree.
getting really shaky there because legally, the overall arching, the courts have not really agreed on who owns a line tree, whether it's counted at the base of the tree, whether it's counted at the 4.5 feet, whether 99% is on one property means they own it, or does it have to be more than 50? They're, in my experience with the courts of that, and I've had quite a bit working in DC. We did a lot of expert witnesses and consulting. There has never been a consensus nationwide. So I think we're really digging ourselves into a hole
So you're
with
saying
this
the
one.
city couldn't legally ascertain that it was a line tree that was shared between 2 lots? The city couldn't say, yeah, I'm cool with that because we're gonna call that a line tree.
Well, we would have to have a survey marking it as a lime tree.
Okay, but think about this, guys. The whole
to say
gist
it's
of
a
this
line.
plan is to save the big trees. Let's not make it difficult to do that. If there's 2 gorgeous trees on a property line between 2 houses, and somebody comes in and says, I want to count that as my high canopy tree, I'm gonna try and take care of it. And a year later, the neighbor comes in and says, I want a permit to take down this because more of it's on my lot. Then you got something that's gonna go in, and whoever wins, if they win, if it goes to court between the neighbors and it wins that the tree can come down, then the person that was counting it is gonna have to plant another
So if
tree.
you don't count it, they still have to put up a high canopy tree.
Yes, exactly,
So I'm arguing that you don't count it.
yeah.
I think it just
If you
gets.
don't count it, you still have to put up a high canopy tree. It's gotta be one of your 3 trees. Those trees don't
Okay,
count.
I mean, that's more
towards your
strict,
3
if you wanna
trees.
go with the more stringent
I
part,
mean,
we're all
That's-
for more trees,
I
so.
lean towards
That's-
Susan.
Yeah, we were just trying to
because
protect those big ones in the middle.
So many of them, I don't
It's
know
not a
that
protection though.
Yeah.
If they're counted, then they're gonna be more apt, I think, to, and plus it
We
gives
can
more
talk about that
land.
when we get to taking them out.
I just
which
think
is
it gives
later.
way more land, the setbacks are so small, you know, I just think it gives more land for real
it's,
big
it's
tall
an
trees.
incentive to
If
I
they
think,
can, if they can
preserve
count those on the
those.
property line.
Can you, when you go to another section about protecting trees, can you wrap this issue there? And say
It's gonna come up.
property line tree cannot be taken down
It's gonna
without
be-
the consent of both property line
Ooh,
owners.
that's a
It's
good
gonna be an
idea.
issue. It's gonna be
And
an issue.
therefore,
Yeah.
and then you can,
That's a good
now you
idea.
can, now you're protecting the trees in 2 different ways.
We could actually just say it right here, which cannot be taken down without the consent of both property owners.
But that's just standard right now.
It's standard in the code or it's standard your procedure?
Well, both, because when you fill out your permit, you're certifying that the tree is located solely on your property.
Okay.
So if it's not,
Yeah.
then we need both people, both tree owners, even if there's just a sliver of doubt.
But
We
if
need
they
both
both
people
get
to
to
agree.
count it, it doesn't really matter anymore. Because basically I'm a property owner, I do the survey, I realize there's 2 trees on the property line, I'm counting them. Now she already knows she has 2, you know? I mean, she already knows I've surveyed it, they're counting for her too. Theoretically, there's 2, so one is hers and one is mine, we're just not saying they have to be,
What happens if there's
Put on-
only one property line tree?
you can't, you have to
It
have
doesn't,
2.
it doesn't count.
Have to have 2.
So you don't count it.
We just kind of did simple math.
It has
You
to
got
be
half
2
the-
trees
you
on
got
the
2
same
half
property
trees.
line.
Takes 2 to tango.
Yeah.
Sort of, kind of.
In other words, instead of 1 tree on your lot, 1 foot over here, and 1 tree on your lot, 1 foot over, that the roots are gonna combine, the canopies are gonna crash, they're gonna die. We got 1 here on the line and 1 here on the line, and you get to count 1, I get to count 1. Okay, there's 2 of them. It just made sense as a way to do something with that very small setback in the sideline and have something count and hopefully be saved and hopefully be native to southern coastal Delaware.
Rehoboth Beach,
I would
coastal
use
area.
2-minute warning.
I agree with that.
2-minute warning. So
I
I
like
wanna talk
this
about,
one.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pardon?
I'm sorry, I like this, the one by Susan, without number 3, and with the addition of, that's the one about.
Oh, you're looking at non-conforming, is that?
No, I'm looking at residential use property. Actually, I'm looking at all of 253.3.
Okay, okay.
I would accept this with the addition of your language regarding fractional areas, which is
Okay.
the second sentence.
Right.
And the removal of the 3rd restriction on non-conforming residential properties.
Where, I'm lost. Where-
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just saying,
It's down, no, you're on the wrong document. You want Susan's document,
Oh, okay.
this one.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And he's
I
talking
got it
about
the way
item
that
number
he-
3, which is the
okay,
transfer
the
of
way he
property.
did, taking
delete,
off.
delete that,
taking
add
off
your
the-
language about the fractional areas, which I think
Right.
is important.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you need to clean up the language a little bit about 2 high canopy native property line trees being on the same property line. But I mean, this, to me, is perfect
Okay.
for what you're trying to accomplish.
One of the
I
things
agree.
that,
So-
Except that you do need a multiple use.
So you haven't gone on to the city-owned property item, you know, you're just talking about the first
I'm just
3.
trying to get through
Gotcha.
one section at a time.
Okay.
One of the things that I added, and it's a terrible sentence, and so Susan and I, neither one of us have quite figured out where to put this because she kind of made a reference other places. If you notice that under residential use property, the first sentence says this. It says every residential use property must have a minimum of 1 healthy existing tree or 1 newly planted minimum 2 caliper tree per, and again, 1,666. Now, what this said to me, this is sort of talking about both new builds and sort of existing property, because, you know, we haven't discriminated between the 2. The thing that makes me nervous about this is this kind of says you could come in and say, I've got a healthy canopy tree over here, but I don't like the species. I'm gonna just take that down and I'm gonna plant a 2-inch caliper tree that, you know, maybe in 50 years is gonna approximate that.
Well, doesn't that go under tree protection?
I don't know. I gotta look ahead and see.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
tree
I'm gonna have to
protection.
shut us off here, but I think if Pete's,
It's not,
if Pete's language for those first 3 sections are good, and we don't take up the last part of it because I have issues with that, I think, you know, that's a
I'm gonna move
reasonable
that to tree,
compromise.
I'm gonna move that to tree protection. Would that make you happier? That
Well,
sentence.
would it make you happier, because it's
Yeah.
I
your
don't care,
concern.
I
It
don't
may not
care,
make
what-
me
I
You
don't
happy.
wanna
care,
protect the tree.
I don't care
Yeah.
where it
Yeah,
is, I
right.
just want it in there somewhere that says is that if you've got a property and you have an existing high canopy tree that can be preserved, you've got to, you, and can be saved, and depending on, you know, whatever you want to, you've got to save that tree.
What, can you show me exactly what sentence you're looking at?
I'm looking at 253 of the red line. If you look at you've outlined
Number
it.
1.
Yeah, you've got that big section.
I
of
like
yellow.
everything
There's one,
up into the words, providing abutting property owners enter a legal agreement.
oh, okay, not that, not that. It's,
Everything above that is fine with me.
okay. But you don't like the legal agreement piece about the 2 high canopy trees.
I think you're just making it more difficult
Okay.
for the owners. I mean, what if one owner wants to enter an agreement, the other owner doesn't like the other owner, and you can't make it happen, now all of a sudden you can't cut those trees.
It's just not practical.
The thing that's tough about this one, about sharing trees, is that you also are responsible for maintaining trees on your property. And that's something that we have further, you know, so now you've got somebody who's responsible for only 1/2 of a tree.
That's how it is. You're
Yeah,
responsible
I'm
for whatever
sympathetic
hangs your
with you.
property.
Yeah.
So I know someone who
But should
lived
you-
next door to a guy that had new construction, just
Right.
tore down the house,
Yeah.
and he had a lime tree. And his mother planted this tree 50 years ago or
Right,
some damn
right.
thing. This thing is beautiful, okay? Except now, there's only half a tree, because the guy with the new thing, he came in.
And she would have a good case if she went to court over that.
Well,
And I
okay,
wish-
but
I
I'm just
hope-
saying,
and
this
I
is,
hope she
you know,
But it's not
that's
the
what
s-
happened.
It is not the city's
Right.
place or responsibility or something we need to take on to get in disputes between property owners about lime trees. If it's dead, it's dead. Other than
That issue is
that,
also about tree protection.
Yeah.
It's not about minimum density requirements. I mean, if you want to just stick to this section on, let's define what a minimum property requirement is. You want to protect property trees, do that expand that section under tree protection about property line trees.
We just had a comment from a concerned citizen, that,
Out
what.
in the hallway?
Huh?
Okay, go ahead.
What?
Oh, Miss Ann?
That, and it's good, very good point. What about, this is probably getting pretty specific, but may or may not need to be taken into consideration. What about rear property trees that are on 4 lots, sitting on the
Sorry.
corner of a property?
I mean, say that again?
A tree that's sitting on a corner of a property. So it's on 4 lots.
Oh, you say there could
Yeah,
potentially be a
3
tree
or 4 property
that's
owners.
Counting the
sitting
same
on-
tree.
at a corner with
because they'd all get to
4
count it as
lots.
one of their trees. Now, they'd have to have another one on the same property line, but is that if you have that kind of tree, I guess theoretically you could cut down on the number, you have a quarter of a tree, but does that happen a lot where they're right on the corner?
no.
I
I
think
don't know
that's
if it's
a
ever
real-
happened to
You
me.
could probably find out by going through the town how many there are in the town, if there are any at all.
Okay,
Right.
so we're not gonna, just, like I said, that we're all playing devil's advocate here, and I think we need to bring up stuff like that, so. Basically, if it's a specific situation like that, again, it might need to be decided by the city arborist, which way it goes. We're throwing it on you.
Who's kind of?
I don't have I won't have any authority to decide
Okay.
that. I can't just be making these
All right.
unilateral random decisions and no.
We have given you so much authority, you're gonna need a raise.
She's good with that.
You guys, we
We
do
have
need-
given you so much authority.
I just noticed though, to bring, pointing out problems, that number one, a building permit will be required for work which decreases the natural area. We can't, if your intention is for any increase, because say if you have a deck that takes up your whole backyard and you rip out the deck and put in 1,000 square foot addition, that would decrease the natural area. So under our current code, you would have to come in conformance to the tree code, but under this, you wouldn't. So that might need some rephrasing.
Right, it doesn't, because you're not over 50%. So you would not
Yeah.
have to add a tree.
So you could do,
So if
I
you took a
mean-
big deck out and put a smaller one in, you
no.
do not have to
So
add a tree.
you took a deck out
Right,
and now you're putting in an addition to your home,
yes.
1,000 feet.
How does that affect FAR?
Assuming it's all allowed.
If it's not over 50% change in your home, then you don't have to do anything.
And that's kind of why I asked, what is the
Okay.
purpose of this section? My thought is the purpose
You don't have
of
to do
this
anything.
section is that it triggers the tree code. The building is, a city office is involved, so that then the tree code can be triggered. So I'm really not sure why we're tying it to any particular square feet or dollar amount or anything. If all that it's meant to be is a trigger to say, and so that's why I'm struggling with
But
this.
you can't,
I'm
if somebody
struggling.
comes in for a re-roofing permit for their house,
Uh-huh.
you can't make them add trees. That's just silly. You can't do
Agreed.
that, Sturgis.
Let's
Yeah,
wrap,
just
let's
can't.
wrap it
And
up.
same thing with if you're putting in a pad for your trash can.
You just can't.
But in the same sense, if you're pulling out a deck and you're putting in 1,000 square foot addition, you should have to.
So how
But
would
it's
Well,
not-
that's
1,000
cha-
square
as
foot
far as I'm
addition.
concerned, that's changing the footprint. If you change the footprint.
But that's not what this says.
Well,
Right.
no, but that's what I'm advocating.
You're,
But it also is probably gonna throw you into that category
But is it gonna
of-
be change the footprint by how much? Again, we're getting into
so
kind
now
of
it's
silly-
500. So you got,
It's
in this one,
current-
it's probably easier if you pick a threshold.
Eight-
Because it's not,
But the building
I've-
code, guys, I'm telling you, addresses it specifically, and you can take the language from the building code. Unless you wanna be more stringent
what-
than the
how-
building code.
What does the building code say that it tells you when you have to
It
get a
basically
permit?
Can't shut it
gives,
down.
it gives the building official the determination to say when
should
you
be
have
able
to
to
bring your
agree
house
on
up to code.
At
Yeah.
least
In
one
other
of
words,
those.
when you're not
I'm
handicap
happy with
accessible
what you just
for
said.
some reason, or the door's not wide enough.
Okay.
All right,
oh, no, that's commercial. It
Yeah.
doesn't affect, that's.
Well, I'm not saying handicap, let's just
Alright.
say,
time out, time out. So there's a proposal on the floor that I'd like you to consider, and then we need to shut this meeting down.
Okay.
So the proposal is,
I would just
from
like-
Peter, if you'll repeat it.
I would just like to focus on residential use property, the first paragraph,
Okay.
and only the first paragraph.
Oh, okay.
And I would like to take the language in draft 22 or draft 1 or whatever you want to call it. And I would like to end that before the word providing in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the sixth line, I would like to end it, 2 high canopy native property trees may combine to account for a first or fourth required tree, period. And at least let's approve that under residential use
And
property.
as to the second paragraph in number 2?
You mean existing non-conforming?
Uh-huh,
I think we have to wait. and-
okay,
But if we
All
can
right.
just approve what a
Wait on
residential
that.
use property
Okay.
has, let's
Okay.
do that.
all right.
So, Pete, just so, you know, what you're doing is you are editing kind of my addition.
Yeah.
And if I understand you, and I think this makes sense, it sounds like you'd be more comfortable if I moved that to tree protection.
Provided abutting property owners enter a legal agreement.
No,
from that-
no, no.
No, but from
That-
from that point on, to move that whole section someplace else, yes.
Okay, no, but are you looking at striking, are you feeling like getting into this legal agreement is just sort of untenable? Or should that be included somewhere else?
I think it's for another discussion,
Okay, got it.
but I think that we can all agree on minimum property requirements for residential use
Okay.
property, and at least get that part.
Okay, can I ask you this? If you go to the next sentence in my red line, which starts healthy high canopy trees, which it's trying to say if you've already got one, you can't just cut it down and put in a sapling. We don't have to discuss this in detail, but I'm kind of hearing you say it would make more sense to move that to
I
tree
have concerns
protection.
about that. I'd like to defer that until.
I agree with the sentiment
Okay.
behind that sentence. I
Okay.
don't think it belongs in minimum property
I
requirements.
got it. Okay, thanks.
Which line are you guys
Got it.
talking?
This is this healthy high canopy.
Where
If
did you
you've got-
stop it though? After what
He's-
permitted
He
species?
stopped here.
But you're leaving the too high canopy part,
He
right?
left it in.
Okay,
okay.
so is that
Basically-
what's in mine?
It's basically yours with the addition of the fractional area language.
Yeah,
It's in the sentence.
he added my fractional areas of.
Fractional area.
In my, if you look at my red line, let's see.
You guys, this
Here
is
it
more
is.
confusing than what we have
Fractional
now.
area.
I'm gonna be honest with you. Right now, max 1 small, max 1 evergreen. This reads more complicated.
Oh, we
Whether
got-
that can be fixed with language, but it reads more complicated than what we have, for sure.
Wow.
So let's get back to that. All right, so 11:56,
Yes.
you're done with the minutes part of the program? And-
Yeah,
And so as to future actions, at some point, we need to bring this to the attention of the Board of Commissioners. So
not
I can
done
either,
yet. It's not-
excuse me,
Sure.
I can either do this in November as an informational piece, or I can wait until later, hopefully maybe December, to talk to them about this in more substantive terms. So I'm looking for some direction on what we might do here.
I think we need to finish what we started and get it done. I
I'm
mean,
not
if it
saying
can't
we're
be
not
done
gonna
in
do
a
that.
2-hour meeting,
I'm
then
not
we
saying
need
that
to-
we're not gonna do that.
We need to get it done, but we
What-
can't wait another month to talk about it again. It needs to be finished up.
Can
It really does.
Can you present to the commissioners the 2 sections that you've agreed on?
I think.
I don't
we
even
should
have to do
present
that.
our
What I can
process,
do is give
change in
them,
process.
I can give them the information that we've, I mean, it's already out there. We've posted this as a
Yeah.
support document, or documents. I would intend to do that, and let them know where we are, based on what happened at the, whatever, September meeting. Okay, give them some background of what led up to the September meeting. Okay? Thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm.
Otherwise,
certainly-
I can,
Is this a
do we,
matter
do
of
we
time
think
that
we'll
we
be
can't
able to
finish
finish this at like at the, whatever the next meeting is, which I'm about December 4
No, I
meeting?
think we'd have to sit here the rest of the day and hash it out to finish it.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying at the December 4 meeting.
Okay, what I would propose
I
is
don't think we
that
can.
folks, including Liz, and I'd like to share a copy of this with Dom. I would like folks and everybody on the committee to take time and review this in more kind of detail, just kind of, and bring thoughts
Well,
back to the next
just to
meeting.
turn the
and
page up
continue.
a quarter turn, I've already been in contact with 2 people on the Board of Adjustment about their
Oh,
taking
about-
on additional responsibilities
Okay,
here.
okay. What did they think?
I'm not gonna tell you.
What,
Well, why
sorry,
not?
what things are they gonna take on? Did I miss that in here?
We eliminated.
So,
What is it?
look,
You
we
can't
gotta,
do that.
we gotta
Guys,
shut this
you
meeting
can't
down.
eliminate Parks and Shade. It's required for Tree City USA. Can't do it. It's gotta stay.
Liz, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Because I'm new to this. What is in your ideal world, what kind of code would you like to see? You just said that this was more complicated than what we have now, so.
It reads more complicated. Yeah.
Really?
I don't know if it is. Yeah, you got first and fourth when applicable, second this, third must be that. Then we have 2 that
we
can
can-
combine to
we can-
create.
That's what I'm saying needs to be refined.
So, but what would you like to see?
Something simpler than that. If the idea is native and canopy, here's our list. 1 must be from section A, the others can be any. Done. Right? Because as it is now, it's a max 1 evergreen, max 1 small, although stated different. It talks about 1/3 and 5,000 square feet. So,
But it also makes you protect almost everything on your lot, whereas we're not doing that anymore. So we were trying to say.
I haven't read any of that, so I don't
Yeah, you
know.
gotta kind of read the whole thing, I think. But basically what we did it specifically like this is because if you're gonna be able to take everything else off your lot that's under 24 inches,
Holy moly,
Okay.
is that what you guys have changed?
all right?
Oh my god.
All right, then you have to tell them the
I'm
three that you can.
wholeheartedly in a disagreement with that.
Okay.
It doesn't follow
Right.
anything that we've gone by in the whole comprehensive development, the purpose and the findings.
Right.
Very few, I mean, I'm all along, I think the size should be increased, but
Get out of here.
we can leave. I'll voice
No,
my,
no, yeah, no, no,
voice
no.
my opinion
We're
with that
gonna meet on this
wholeheartedly.
again. We are gonna
Disagreement.
meet on this again. All I'm trying to do is give the Board of Commissioners some information here. Give me some help.
Could you just tell them we're exploring a different process? That
I'll
we're
be happy
looking,
to.
we're looking at.
I'll
an-
be
at
happy
an
to.
abbreviated-
Duck and
that
cover, yeah.
We're looking at an abbreviated version that's trying to.
Sure. That's
make
what
the
I
mi-
need to know.
Make the mitigation process less
Do we
onerous.
have a thought of being able to work our way through this at, say, the December meeting? No.
We got through 2.5 in, what,
At
2
the
hours?
rate we're going, I think we may be in 2025.
What do you suggest then, Chief?
I'm suggesting that we need to be generic, for one thing. We need to quit
Or maybe even
going
8.
into too many details because the commission is not gonna consider the details anyway.
You know what might really help if you guys have time, and I know this is asking a lot because it's gonna take a day, honestly. But as attorneys, we wrote this as non-attorneys. And we wrote it knowing that, I thought Liz had read it already, which you can't start at the top without reading the whole thing. It would actually, I think we should let Liz read it before we do anything else at this
I
point.
agree.
At this point, we're probably just wasting, never mind, I take that all back. I mean, she's gotta read the code, she's
Well,
the city
but-
arborist, okay?
But whether or not the legal details and phrasing and stuff is correct, I think that's more in the details than,
Right.
and that's what he's saying. We,
Right.
not
But
that
you
we
need to read
shouldn't,
the code.
not that we shouldn't
Yeah.
focus on the legal aspects, but right now we're trying to get big picture details, all that type of stuff down.
I didn't realize you
What's
hadn't
your
read.
opinion of the
the whole
whole canopy tree concept? as
It's only a
opposed to-
page and a
Promoting
half,
them?
so it's
Well,
not a whole lot
thi-
of reading.
The thrust of this, and I'm brand new, the thrust of what I understand we're doing now is focusing on canopy rather than one tree from list A,
Yes.
one list from,
Yes.
one tree from list B. What is your opinion of that?
Well, I think all along, everybody was in agreement on quality over quantity, right?
Right.
That's
Okay,
not what our
right.
code is all about right now, though. It's
No,
definitely
no,
all
it's
about
not.
quantity.
So this is our attempt, Liz, and
Arguably it
we may
is.
be,
It's just a different way of measuring it.
we may be missing
Yeah.
the boat.
It's
and-
measuring it at 4.5 feet versus
It's
canopy
taking down a
radius.
24-inch tree and putting up 10 small trees that aren't gonna live because they're crowding each other out.
All right, we're drifting again, folks. Let me try and shut this meeting down because we have another meeting that's coming in here. We gotta get out of here.
Okay.
All right, so I will, based on your comments, I will try and make some kind of report to the Board of Commissioners at this, at their November meeting, regular meeting. All right. Next meeting is December 4. It has been suggested that, given the weight of what we're dealing with here, maybe we should move back up to 9 o'clock. Any comments on that? Okay, not hearing any, I'm gonna say.
I have, unfortunately, I can be here until 10:30, that's it that day.
You can, bye-bye,
I cannot be here after 10:30.
after 10:30. Well, that's even more important that we go to 9
So
o'clock.
I apologize, but you
That's
guys can
okay.
hash it
That's
out
all right.
without me
Hey,
interrupting.
We
right
all
when we're
got
done.
that. We all got that. All right, so now I'd like to discuss schedule for meetings in the next calendar year. And I got to start with, as I've noted in the agenda, that the first Wednesday, if we continue that process, which I'd like to do, is actually the first of January. So I'm proposing that we move that particular meeting to January the 8th. Is that acceptable to everybody? With we'll decide on
I'll be unable to attend.
I will be unable to attend
Meetings
as
in
well.
January.
meetings in January, period.
Meetings in January.
And meeting
period.
on January the 8th is
I will be back on the 20th.
20th.
I'll be gone the
Okay.
2nd through the 20th.
All right. We may have to cancel the January meeting.
No, you guys could just hash it out without us
Yeah,
here.
we can make a lot of progress.
You're all right.
All right.
Yeah, you really could, because we've already,
We'll decide that at
We
the
good?
December meeting.
Okay.
So, again, I'm looking for an okay on first Wednesday of each month. After that, so February 5, March 4, April 1, April Fool's Day, May 6, June 3, July 1, August 5, September 2, October 2, that's not right, November 7, and December 2. But anyway, the first Wednesday of each of those months, and if it becomes an issue, we can address it as we get closer to those dates, okay?
Good.
All right. Interesting meeting today, folks. I'm gonna adjourn at
Have we
12:05.
agreed that we're gonna, what you guys prepared, that's the new template, is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
oh, we got that done.
yeah, we did.
And
Yeah.
we got,
Yay.
we got 2 sections done of the new template.
Yes, we do. And I'll tell them that,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks, Liz.
We got 2.5 sections done. 2 and whatever sections done. Thank you for doing this. You're already contributing.
Oh, I thought we were already adjourned.
Yeah, we're adjourned.
Okay.